Welcome to the Sales Career Podcast. This is your host, Kevin Hopp. Whether you're an executive, sales leader, or just getting your career in sales started, I'm here to help you read between the lines and hear the real stories that you can't get from a resume or from a LinkedIn profile, all designed to help you shape your own sales career. Let's dive right into today's episode and see what we can learn. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Sales Career Podcast. I'm your guest, Kevin Hopp. I'm not your guest, I'm your host. My guest today is a seasoned software sales veteran of over 12 years. He joined HubSpot pre-IPO, aka before it was cool. He's still there today, also has his own side business, which I want to hear a little bit about, called My Core OS, all about mental health, mindset, and a few other things tangentially related to sales and helping coach sales teams. Everybody please welcome the great and powerful Jordan Benjamin.
Thanks for having me on, Kevin. I'm pumped to be here.
Awesome. Well, let's talk about that, HubSpot before it was cool angle. I'm really interested in this. So you've been at HubSpot longer than, I've been anywhere. I've been in the professional working world for about 8-9 years, and you've been at HubSpot that whole time. Talk to me about what that ride has been like and what it's like working for a company that's kind of made it,
Yeah, it's really interesting watching the transformation from maybe 600 employees to 6,000 now. A lot has to change, but what I think may be funny that you don't really see on my LinkedIn profile aside from job changes is I was at some earlier stage startups prior to HubSpot, and I got laid off twice within 6 months of those different startups. And my fiance was getting ready to move to Boston. I didn't want to go to Boston. I was afraid of the East Coast, and yet getting laid off kind of forced my hand to where I'd done some strategic partnership work with some people at HubSpot and reached out and said, you guys hiring? I guess I might move to Boston because my girlfriend at the time, now fiance, is moving there. And so as I got to HubSpot, I was looking for a company that maybe had a little bit more stability. They had a few hundred employees. There was talks of IPO happening. And I was looking for something a little later stage because the startups I'd been at were, 60 to 100 employees maybe. And both at least faltered. One totally failed. The other one just had to let go about 40% of the staff. And so it pushed me to go say, okay, how can I see this next level of company? And HubSpot has done so many things right, where literally we were in a company meeting today, and one of our board members who sits over many different top companies was like, yeah, you guys have built this customer first mentality and have it ingrained as part of your culture. And I think that is something that we're seeing so much in the sales realm, where I see posts on LinkedIn all the time from people giving shout outs to how amazing our support team is. And for me as a seller, being able to come in and know that, great, a customer that I bring on board, they may run into issues. There are going to be challenges that you run into with anything that you buy, but they're going to have incredible support that delights them, is one of those things that I think kind of sets the core ethos of a company around how do we make sure we're solving for a customer. That has been one of those key things that really has helped us succeed and really accelerate, where we're still growing at an incredibly fast rate, even now at a size, that we are, that's more than 10x what we were when I started.
10x. Wow. Being with the company through 10x growth, that's the pitch. And I'm sure it was a similar pitch that you got with the startups, right? The startups that we all joined, that a lot of people I talk to and network with and meet like you, if you're involved in small companies, the biggest reason, in my opinion, to get involved in a startup is that 10x potential, is that incredible ride you're going to be on, the rocket ship. But
yep.
there are so few of these rocket ships out there that actually take off and actually have some sort of meaningful exit or anything like that. So that definitely is a pretty incredible experience you've been able to have there. So you touched on something that I want to talk about a little bit. In your experience with sales, how has it been, working at HubSpot and other places in your career, this customer first mentality? Is that the reason that HubSpot went 10x? Is that something that you think was the ultimate differentiator, or is that just part of good leadership? Because I guess one of the reasons that I ask is I had a guy on my podcast and he was talking about how like prospecting is broken, right? Prospecting in general is broken. And we don't prospect for other people. You always prospect for yourself. And it's very selfish. It's very like, I want this. I'd love to show you a demo, things like that. And I'm a huge proponent of shifting that to talking about the customer, talking about their problems, talking about what works for them. So how has that like theme evolved throughout your career and now getting to watch it at HubSpot? How is that like intertwined with your sales activities?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I do think that leadership, you mentioned, there's so many keys that go into success. But what I love about this customer first mentality, especially when I relate it to sales, but it also applies across the entire company and gives us a unified mission to go after and a purpose to solve for. And then from the sales side of it, I can't tell you how many pieces of cold outreach today. I went through LinkedIn, probably responded to 20 people trying to sell me something. And I was like, I'd love it if you added some value before you ask me for my time or for, a pitch that you want to give me. Because if you're there saying, as sellers, we have this opportunity to talk to so many people that do a similar job that usually don't talk to other people like them. Maybe they've got a couple friends in a similar spot, but as sellers, we have this really unique perspective to say, I talk to people across your industry. I see the challenges that you all have. I see similar goals that you all want to accomplish. And I can actually help you, I hate the phrase, but cut through the noise or get to a solution faster. Because many people have stumbled through the same potholes that on the path that you're getting ready to start going down. If I can help you, even if that helping you is saying we're not the right fit for you today or ever, that's how I think we start building this much more cyclical and positive cycle in sales than the traditional, like, I'm just here to take as much as I can, that is just so short-term thinking, is really short-lived in what Simon Sinek talks about as a very finite game versus this infinite game where things change. There's no real winning in business. Yes, hitting the rocket ship, the 10x growth is success, but somebody could do that and upseat you tomorrow in today's day and age in business. Mm-hmm. And so I think really taking this longer term mindset, where at HubSpot, one of the phrases Brian Halligan, our former CEO and founder, used to always say is, we're in the early innings. And he'd even say that in the last 2 years when we're still, we're like, oh my gosh, we just got rated number 1 CRM on G2 Crowd and have 1 million users. And you're like, oh, we've made it. And it's like, no, these are still the early innings because business today changes so fast. And so I think focusing on the customer, having this, more infinite or longer term mindset and knowing things change are things that really help us unify our mission across the company and help us all have kind of a core set of beliefs that help drive us forward.
Gosh, that. I mean, you touched on so many things there. One of the things you mentioned is having the trustworthiness built with the customer to tell them we're not the right solution for you. And it's actually something that like I've struggled with because when I was early in sales, I loved. You got to understand my background a little bit. Like I come from sports, right? Like I come from a very competitive high school football team, championship team, and like always being an athlete. So as cliche as that is, like athletes do make really good salespeople because I'm just like competitive. I'm competitive, yep. And I like it when my heart rate gets above resting level. Like that actually gets me going. And what is it? What do you feel the first time you make a cold call? Ooh, 125, 145 beats a minute, and you're sitting in a chair, and you're just like, holy cow. So I loved like the coffee is for closers, the energy, like the, for lack of a better term, the fratty culture of like outbound sales in the beginning of my career is what I really liked. But part of what I've seen recently and what I now take in my consultancy to like all the clients that I help with outbound sales process, structure, strategy is solve a problem or go away. And I will CC Ryan Reisert on this, who's another a mentor of mine who kind of taught me that phrase. And I bring it to everyone that I coach now because I'm like, solve a problem or go away. If they don't have a problem, be confident enough to tell them, hey, you don't have a problem that I can solve, and I'm going to go do something else. Like, adios. You know what I
Totally.
mean? And a lot of reps struggle with that. They're like, but I called them to set the meeting. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't make any sense. It's got to make business sense for them. Put them first. It's not about you.
Yeah,
right.
It's our prospects smell that stuff. They know it, and I think that's one of the things that I love to always be closing and everything in that vein. But I love moving much more towards always be helping, because I think I talk to so many reps and managers, especially as we've gotten through the pandemic, are taking a lot on, and if we can't find a little bit bigger purpose, or if we can't see, how are we actually helping add value into the world opposed to just trying to close the deal or make that next commission check a little bit larger, it's a little bit short-lived. It really is this kind of, I listened to a talk with Simon Sinek and Brené Brown talking about finite versus infinite games, where sports, like, there's clearly defined rules, you understand what the outcome is, and it is this finite game. In sales, we're still a little bit there. I think we have clearly defined rules, but there's new reps that could come in that could come above you on the waterfall. But it's much more about how do you compete against yourself. And if you can show up every day and add value, you may not close one prospect today, but you never know when they're going to go to another company, when they're going to have a friend that has a similar challenge that they can refer you to, or when they're going to go leave a great review that helps boost your company's ratings to drive 10 times the amount of leads than you may have had if you would have tried to slam that deal in. And I think that's where we're really seeing some nice evolution in sales to help folks have more purpose behind what they do, feel like they can add value opposed to just extract value, and actually have a path to help and solve a problem versus just kind of try and jam a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, wow. You should trademark that. Add value, don't just extract value.
I've probably heard that somewhere else. That's probably an internal HubSpot saying. I think it was add value before you extract value, and so that's part of this whole like inbound marketing concept. Is we've just changed the way that a lot of buyers want to interact, and so the more that you can build trust, the more that you can add value and credibility to what you do before you have to ask for anybody's money, is just such a nice way to start a conversation, opposed to, hey, buy my stuff. Hey, we work with people like you. You should buy my stuff. And I admit there are a lot of people that have no idea there are problems that can be solved. And so I do think there's this art to helping folks identify problems that they don't even know that exist, because a lot of us live our lives with these blinders on where we don't know what we don't know. And so there is this education that has to happen, but I think there are ways to do it in sales that help make selling a more sustainable profession and make it a more noble profession, opposed to the slimy used car salesman that we're all associated with still, even though most people are buying their cars online and using Carvana and CarMax and all these other car gurus, all these other tools today that help make that process better. But yet that's still the stigma that sticks around with sales that sucks for all of us. And I think it is moving away quicker day by day.
I like to think so too. And I wonder, talk about blinders on, like the echo chamber of LinkedIn, where you have a big following, I have a pretty big following, and we still are small fish compared to some of these guys who's got like 80,000, 100,000 plus followers. But I see a lot more of this positive momentum, this positive feeling around like, don't be a shitty seller. To be frank with it, right? Like, don't be a shitty seller, don't be that guy, right? Which is only going to do good things. Like, I wonder, like, what would you say to someone who's like, hey, I've been selling something that's like very commoditized, and I've found that it's like really cutthroat. Like, what are some ways that you've found in your career to like add value when the guy who's going to show up right after you is selling the exact same sort of thing, right? Like restaurant sales, or car sales, or where I worked for a year, telecom sales. Holy cow, dude! There's 17 competitors that all do a similar thing. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you add value in a scenario like that?
I think that's where having that perspective and being somebody that understands the industry incredibly well, understands the competition, understands what are other people doing in the space, and then also has this level of understanding of the different types of prospects you talk to. So maybe you were talking to a CIO or a IT manager or something in the past where they've got people bombarding them every single day, just as much as, when you put coach or consultant on your LinkedIn profile, all of a sudden you have 10 messages a day from people saying, we help coaches fill their calendars. Yeah. Well, lead with something that adds value that helps me do my job better. Hey, here are the 5 things I see people struggling with in this role, and here's one of the keys that we've seen be really helpful for people to solve it. And it doesn't have to be your product in a perfect world. Ideally, it then connects to what your product does and can help solve for. But I think that's where, again, we have this unique opportunity to say, I talk to 100 people like you a day or week maybe, and here's what I'm seeing. I love companies that put together different studies around, here are the top challenges that, in my world, sales leaders are seeing with mental health within their organization or with their sales and marketing. Here's the biggest sales and marketing challenges we're seeing, and here's where people are putting investment. When we can actually put together, it doesn't have to be an official study, but we can take that and lead with it as a seller to say, hey, here's an interesting blog post I came across or wrote, or here's what I saw that, your CEO is talking about doing this at the company. Here's something that may help you, stand out and make you look like a rock star in your role, versus just saying, if you buy my stuff, you're going to look great. If we can lead with something that adds value and builds trust first and foremost, I think that helps us stand out in a commoditized market where in many cases it's just a race to the bottom on price. But if we have that trust, ideally they see that there's a little bit more value beyond just the bottom line price in working with a type of person and a type of company that people really value.
It's interesting that you mentioned like the race to the bottom with price. It's something that in my career I struggled with in the beginning. In the beginning of my career, I was like, don't we want to sell something cheap? Because like everyone likes cheap, right? Like, and it kind of comes from, I think a lot of the way that we think about money comes from our family, right? Like however you see your dad making big, your dad, your mom, the adults in your life, the way you see them making big financial decisions will change the way you think about money, right? So for instance, like my father, very conservative, very conservative with his money. He is an engineer, had a great 6-figure job for his whole career, very consistent, high income, but at the same time, like very, very, like refinanced his mortgage like once in 30 years. I'm like, why wouldn't you do it again and again? He's like, well, I just don't know. Mortgage people are trying to make money and and stuff like that. It's like, like it changed the way that I thought about money. So when I first got into sales, pardon me, I thought that I wanted to sell cheap things so that people would buy them. Like, hey, if you sell this at a discount, people want to buy it all the time. And what's interesting is like I've seen some like e-commerce brands that like take this to the extreme. Like the few places you could see this like discounting strategy that works pretty well, from what I see, is like e-commerce brands and like OnlyFans girls. Like OnlyFans girls are constantly on Twitter or anywhere. They're like 30% off, 40, 50% off, 60% off, always. And then e-commerce brands will throw things at you all the time, like 50% off for this weekend only, or 25% off. But in actual consultative selling, like software sales, I've found to be the complete opposite best way to approach it, which is be really expensive, be the premier decision, and build so much value that price isn't really like an object. You know what I mean? It's like, well, the price is the price.
Yeah,
we're solving a business challenge here.
That's exactly right. Is like if you can solve that business challenge that has value associated to it, and ideally value that's higher, makes it a lot better. I think the other thing that you said there that is really, really important for folks, for whether you're an individual contributor, ideally you've figured this out before you become a leader, but it's critical for our leaders as well, is how do you build that self-awareness to understand your perception, your bias, and your belief about money? Right. Whether it's definitely starting with like, well, how did I grow up seeing money? I know for me personally, my dad was the executive director of a nonprofit, and I made like $150K or something out of maybe my second or third year out of college, and he was like, I've been working for 30 years. I've got a master's degree. I am the boss of the entire place, and you just made more money than me 2 years out of college. Like,
Right.
what the hell? And I've had some of this ceiling above me and still struggle with it a little bit about feeling guilty about making too much money. And, that's where I try and do a lot of philanthropic stuff and do some other things to give back, which I think sales opens the door for, and is how I justify some of that purpose. But for you as a seller, if you can't understand your deep-rooted beliefs about money and how that impacts how you show up, it's gonna be something that somewhere along the way could very likely bite you in the ass, because your prospects think about money in either similar or different ways. And I think the other thing, I was talking with a new seller the other day. I was like, do you think our product's expensive? Yeah, I think it's really expensive. $10, $20, $30, $50,000, that's expensive.
Yeah.
Your prospects are gonna think so too. And so
Yeah.
if you don't have that conviction and belief in what you're bringing to the table has a ton of value for folks, it's going to be really, really hard to get behind it, especially if you've got this really conservative view on money of like, ooh, wow, $10,000, that's a ton of money, or not. And so I think those are two really key beliefs that folks don't really ever think about that really impact their sales performance and how they lead and work with teams as well.
Oh yeah. And the last piece of advice I'd tack on to that is to learn that, like, company money is different than personal money. And when I figured that out, game changed. It's the way I treat $10,000, way different than how the company I'm working with or the organization or whatever, right?
Yep.
And then, like, once you figure that out, that it's a company's money, and that in a company, they actually, especially like venture-backed companies, they have to go spend a lot of money. Like, they have to go spend this money. So when you get them to transact at a large level, even if you're internal, like, oh, my family never had nice stuff, and then I just sold an $80,000 piece of software that you could buy like a Mercedes with, like, even if you have that little feeling, you got to remember it's like that person's job at that company to spend that money. They got to spend that money. And if you're solving that business challenge, you have value associated with it, you're golden all the way around,
Yeah, I love it. I think so much to like gap selling from Keenan and others around, if you've identified where they're trying to go, well, great. That $8 million, growth goal that they have, or $800,000 growth goal, well, your $80,000 piece of software is a drop in the bucket to help them get where they want to go. And so again, it's not about me and selling a deal that helps me hit my quota. It's a part of it. And I'm very transparent with folks when I'm selling. It's like, hey, I am in sales, take it for what it's worth here. But, the interaction that we have is like, I want to help you solve your problem. And I brought something to the table that helps you solve that challenge and gets you to, 10x, 5x, whatever it is, your investment in this product is.
That's right. Wow. Well, talk to me a little bit about, in your career, you've launched a little business here. You're still full-time at HubSpot, but above your head is My Core OS. It's a business that you've started here. Talk to me about that and like how that's handling some of the mental health challenges associated with sales.
Yeah. So one of my early jobs before I got into sales, although it was kind of sales, was at Lululemon selling yoga clothing. I'd been into yoga for a while, been into meditation for many years. And so I actually ended up going out and getting certified as a yoga instructor once I got into sales, and started teaching different yoga courses, classes internally at different companies, doing some of the stuff around wellness, started leading some different meditations as well, and ultimately started building out a lot of different courses from the training that I've done to try and figure my own crap out, as most of the things that I needed to learn in school never really translated to me being my best self or creating my best life as a professional. And so I saw this big challenge where it was like so much of the sales training is about the tactic and doing the outbound prospecting correctly, doing the discovery well, which are amazing things. But if I show up and I'm fried, or if I'm burnt out, or if I'm just not in a good state or good place, a lot of those things kind of fall to the wayside. And so I've built out some different programs with teams that I run some inside of HubSpot and then outside as well to say, how do we help people start building self-awareness about who they are? Some of those beliefs that they have from earlier in their life that may impact how they show up as a seller, but as well as outside of sales. Because if we have to show up as two different people in work and outside of work, it starts to create this friction and tension between our internal world and our external world. And so we've put together all these different programs that ultimately work with folks all the way from, understanding self-awareness, mental health, mindfulness, goal setting in a way that's actually much more meaningful than just, oh, here's the target the company gave me, to see how do we find goals that are really empowering. So when things don't go great, we actually have something that's much stronger of a foundation to stand on. And really working with folks to say, especially as COVID's come up and the pandemic and remote work, how do we build connection with our teams? How do we understand ourselves so we can actually go up and empathize and show up for others as well? And so we run different workshops to help create sustainable peak performance so folks can really not only just have a great year or quarter or month, but how do they do that over the long term as they really do that across the team for leaders as well as different sellers as a whole?
Geez, where were you when I was carrying a bag? I could have really used some of that kind of coaching. It's been feast or famine for me in my sales career before I got into consulting. When I got into consulting, I finally got to become my own boss, and even throughout the last 4 years, I've had semi full-time engagements with companies. But I found a lot of peace in the idea that I am working for myself. You know what I mean? It took me a long time to figure out that was kind of the vibe and like the thought process that I had to have that actually was sustainable. It's the thing I've done the longest in my career, but I didn't know that right away, and it was really tough. And I got laid off a bunch in my early sales career. So
sales is so tough. It is this feast or famine. It is this roller coaster. It is, it is a hard effing job. And yet nothing that I got in school told me, how do I handle rejection? How do I handle failure? How do I handle, bad breakups and all these things that happen in life that also have a lot of similarity to sales. And so I like to say, getting better at sales and a lot of these key qualities helps you get better at life. The better I can be an active listener, the better I can understand or handle rejection, the better I can do things that make me uncomfortable, the more likely I am to succeed in sales and in all these other parts of my life where traditional school was there to take us on this very linear path. Well, that sure is not sales, and it's definitely not life. I tell a lot of folks, I don't know where I stole this line from. I wish I could credit it to somebody. I know I heard it from somewhere else, but it's this thought of life is like bumper cars. It's not this linear path. You kind of drive, you hit a wall, and then you're like, oh, okay, I got to back up. And maybe you turn 90 degrees, maybe you turn 180 degrees and run the other way. But this is this constant evolution of kind of testing new things and now saying, yeah, I went in a traditional sales path and now I'm going I'm going to run my own thing. And you're probably going to learn stuff, and maybe that'll evolve. Maybe it'll stay the same the rest of your career. Nobody knows. But being open to say that there are new ways that we're going to believe and think and act and operate as time goes on, as we evolve as humans, that's how we get to learn. And that's how we also can, at least for me, handle some of the struggles or failures that I run into every day, knowing that, okay, this is a new data point to help me course correct on the path that I want to go on.
Yeah, it's I'm thankful that you're doing what you're doing there, because I learned a lot of these lessons the really hard way. Like what I mean is like I put my entire identity and like kind of self-worth in my employment for a while. Like I was I identified as like, I work at this company, I wear the company shirt, I tell everybody about it. And then when I got laid off from that company, talk about a bad breakup. It was terrible. It was a personality crisis, is what it was.
Yep.
It was a crisis of my being, which was really, really difficult. And
it's super common, man. It is so common for us. And I sit there, I'm like, oh, HubSpot 8 years, like, great. Like, that's, and part of me is like, oh, it's terrifying to even think about leaving, because so much of my identity over, the longest I've been anywhere is associated to that. And they've got this great brand. And I just started getting text messages from my mom about like, oh my gosh, I saw a HubSpot commercial on Good Morning America or whatever it is. And like, oh, wow, cool. But at the same time, like, we're all humans. We all have unique value to bring to the world, and it is not dependent upon the company. Ideally, the company is something that aligns with who you are, and you can feel connected to that, but you don't define your value just by your quota attainment, because you have so much more to bring to the world than that. But I talk to so many sellers that their measure of their worth is what did they do last month or last quarter in terms of quota attainment. And it is such a limited view of how fantastic we are as humans, even though we may struggle sometimes.
Ain't that the truth? You are not your number. Like that's something you should put on your website too. You are not your
ingrain
number.
It in your head that your number, maybe it's a piece of it, maybe it's how you pay your bills or how you fund your next vacation or whatever it is that you want to do, but that does not define your worth and value as a human. But maybe if that stays on for too long, maybe there's other things that would be better for you and you'd be better suited to do. And that's, again, where you get to drive your own little life bumper car down a different path. And there's nothing that's holding us back. One thought that comes to mind on this is the concept of sunk costs. A lot of us think that because we've done something for a year, 5 years, 10 years, because we went to school for it, that's all we can ever do. And that's not true. There was this image that I shared the other day on LinkedIn that talks about, all the roads that lead to like where we are, but your next step forward can be something totally different. Whether a guest that I talked to a while back, he was like, yeah, I got some feedback that I was kind of an a-hole. And it really opened my eyes to say, okay, I now have the choice. Do I continue to act like that or do I change? And that is one of the things that I took from yoga. You lay at the end in Shavasana, and they call it corpse pose, for this point of saying you can now change whatever that next step you take is once you leave your mat, because you now have the ability to choose how you want to show up in that next step. But most of us just run on this hamster wheel of like, oh, yeah, I've got a quota in front of me. I've got to keep moving towards it. And we have a hard time actually architecting the life that we want to create, because we're just stuck on this hamster wheel that I blame school in many cases for putting us on.
Ain't that the truth? The idea that, school preaches this linear path, and man, life is anything but linear.
And school solves for the median. It's easy to solve for the middle. It's really challenging to say, how do we help emulate the best of the best? And I think that's where you see a lot of folks right now struggling with burnout, mental health, and lost productivity because of it. I saw a study today posted by Gallup, and a friend, the CEO at a company that I love, said, employee engagement over the last 20 years has only gone up by 4%. What are we missing? And engagement is at 34%, and that's up from the past. And so there's something that we're missing around how do we really connect ourselves to the companies that we want to support and find something that we actually can engage with, which is why I think we see a lot of people going to run their own thing, which you'll find has its ups and downs too. The grass is not always greener, but you get a chance to learn, try new things, get uncomfortable, and that's really where growth and learning happens, because learning does not just end when you finish your academic career.
That's right. That is very right. Lifelong learning, super, super important concept. Well, Jordan, we could probably talk a lot longer here, but I think we should wrap things up here for session 1. I think I'd love to have you back sometime if you're open to it. Lot to talk about
Always.
here.
Love it.
So I wrap up with the same 3 questions, talking about our number, right? So the first question is, what's the biggest commission check that you've ever gotten?
I think it was after a year of accelerators, and I was just shy of 6 figures. So it was in like the 90-ish K range.
90-ish K, which is what a lot of people will work all year just to make, and that was one check for you. That's phenomenal, huh?
It was great. But then, of course, it's like, oh, how do I do even better next year? Which is always an interesting psychological game to play in sales.
That's right. I mean, and that's part of why if you're in sales, that hamster wheel that you speak of, there's a healthy way to do it, and I'm sure you pioneered a healthy way to go about it the next year. So the next question I have, Jordan, in your career, to go all the way back to your very first job so far, what has been your favorite job?
Oh boy, my favorite job. Honestly, it's the one that I've been in for the last 8 years. I've gotten a chance to work with business owners and coach them on how to grow their businesses while having freedom to. I live up in the mountains of Colorado now, and have been remote for 4 years pre-COVID. And so it's really allowed me to do the things that I'm super passionate about that fill me up. But also, I feel like I get to add value and give. I talked to 2 companies today, helping them think about how do they build hiring processes as they're at a spot of really starting to scale and accelerate growth. And in 30 minutes, they're like, wow, you just took like 10 hours of work off of our plate and gave us better quality than we would have had otherwise. And so I think that's the one that I feel most fulfilled in as it stands right now, and gives me the ability to have freedom that fills me up as well on my personal side of things.
I love that. I mean, 8 years in a row. Hard to say it's not that job. I would have thought if you didn't like it, you would have found something else to go do full time by now.
That's exactly it.
Love it. Well, last question I have for you here. Let's imagine that money is no object, that you have all the money that you could ever want, and you don't have to work. What would you do with your time?
I would probably do some form of like outdoor, either like oceanic support or climate support. I'm a big scuba diver. I'm actually super stoked. I'm going scuba diving in a few days. And so I'm a big fan of the environment, getting outside. I either love being underwater or on top of a mountain. And so I'd be spending time in those areas, trying to see how I can give back and how I can add value for myself and then for future generations as well.
Love that. Being outside, underwater, or on top of a mountain. Those are very extreme differences there.
It's that sales roller coaster. It's like, yep, I'm either way up, way down, but either way, try and find a balance through it all, and kind of float on through it.
Cool. Awesome. Well, this is your opportunity to pitch anything you want to pitch, or how do people connect with you?
Yeah, check me out on LinkedIn, Jordan Benjamin. Yes, it's a first and a last name, or it could go the other way. My Core OS is my company if folks are trying to figure out how do they handle mental health, burnout, resilience, or stress within their team. And then my podcast, Peak Performance Selling, where I interview a lot of different sellers, sales leaders about how do they think about sales and how do they approach it, are probably the best places to track me down.
Love it. Well, Jordan, thank you very much, and let's stay in touch, man. Cheers.
Will do. Thanks.
If this episode is interesting to you, please share your thoughts on LinkedIn or Twitter. Tag me, and I might just feature your post in an upcoming episode of the Sales Career Podcast. Or, if you want to connect directly, go to hopconsultinggroup.com, and we'll find a way to work together. Cheers.